Thanks for having me. I've brought a couple of slides. So I was already introduced. My name is Linus. I'm a spokesperson of the Chaos Computer Club. As any decent hacker, I have never visited a single university lecture in computer science. Instead, I received a computer at the age of 7 and a modem at the age of 11. And my first classmates got police visits when I was 12. So then my parents eventually told me, hey man, you're spending so much time on the computer, don't you want to, do something with people, right? And I said, yeah, well, yeah, maybe, let's study psychology. And when I was done studying psychology, I said, I would like to now go back to my computers. And now that I'm dealing with computer problems that I thought, are deterministic and, solvable, and there is a true and a wrong, and there is something that is right, and there's better, and everything is measurable, I was hoping for a very, nice life of knowing things better than others and being able to prove that I'm right. Now, how did that go? Now I work in red teaming and incident management, build security strategies. That is my day job. And once I'm done with my job, I try to analyze security or anti-security systems such as election systems, state-sponsored malware, and I criticize IT security legislation. And I think one of the big problems in this whole industry, and I'll speak of an industry here, or of a phenomenon, is the term cyber. So if anybody imagines cyber, you think of these like crazy people that do crazy attacks and crazy stuff. While I think we all know the reality is more like some shell game hustlers, tricking people into giving them money or clicking executable files. And I would say the definition of cyber is, I have no idea what I'm talking about, because it really helps an industry and a society to close their eyes and to have an excuse for not understanding the problems at hand and then not really dealing with them. Because the sad truth is, every practically relevant IT security problem is theoretically solved, right? There is no such thing as an IT security problem that we do not have a solution for. Still, practical IT security is one big disaster. So here is me trying to deal with technology, while I believe the actual problem is the people that build and operate it. And I've been, as a consultant, traveled a couple of countries, saw a couple of industries, and every time I realize that things are broken, I tend to wonder why we got there. And I have come to, boil it down to this simple statement. If you digitize a shit process, you get a digital shit process. And now, since you started with a lighthouse project, you now need to build another lighthouse, right? And then you have 2 or 3 lighthouses, and eventually you have a lot of bloat and a complexity in an architecture that you cannot really solve anymore. And I was wondering, why is nobody doing things right, or why are there no incentives or motivations to do things right? I brought 3 acts, just a couple of anecdotes from mainly CCC research. Most of this not my research, so I'll credit the researchers here. And I'll start with health record. So Germany decided, well, how about we digitize the health system, right? Let's have a digital patient record. And we'll have 70 plus million patients' health records in there. We make it mandatory. We'll have about 110,000 hospitals and practices that be connected to it, and will leave us only little more than a decade of time. And we said, okay, how can we do this? Obviously, the state is not going to be able, so we do a public-private partnership. That's a great idea, because now we have a company, private-public partnership, that defines its own standards, and then a government that makes them the law. Of course, the government owns the minor majority share of the company and can tell them what to do. And the first thing that come out of this is, well, what can we do first? Well, now everybody needs to buy a connector, right? That is basically a firewall with a couple of rules. Of course, marketed at the prices you would ask from doctors, right? And not from end users. So, and then they had sold everybody these connectors, and then they said, well, now you need to buy new connectors, because the TLS certificate on the connector expired. So that's when well, I'm not really sure, you need to buy a new connector, right? Every once in a while, my TLS certificates expire, and I don't buy a new machine. To be honest, there is a correlation, but definitely not a causation, right? So Flübke looked at it and proved them wrong, showing them, of course, you can update the certificate, you can create a certificate signing request, and here's the publication. Now, why did we at the CCC care about this? Well, because these connectors are paid by the German health system, and the cost estimate was about 400 million that we were saving with the few lines of code that Flübke published. Unfortunately, we didn't save that money because the vendors said, well, it's not in the spec that we need to provide an element that can actually update the certificates. So I think one of the three vendors decided, no, we're not going to do that update, even though it was publicly proven it's not needed. Well, then they went ahead and said, well, now we need to build this health cloud with health data. So let's go ahead and let's get started. And of course, if you do something like that, the German Minister of Health at the time said this is the biggest and most critical digitization project of the Federal Republic of Germany. And he was absolutely wrong, right, because it's the most critical data, right? It's the largest data collection of this kind. And I think he was absolutely wrong. So you need to generate trust. How can you better generate trust than to have some expert analysis of your system? And then I saw this curious publication, of course, by those who specify this system. And they said, well, the study confirms the electronic health record is secure. I was like, okay, wow, that is a new. I haven't really, seen anybody prove that anything is secure. I've only good experience in proving that something is not secure. So I was really curious, how did they do this? So they went to Fraunhofer Institute, which is like an independent research facility, and dropped them their policies, right? Said, look, please, can you read this and say that it's secure? And there were so many policies and so much paperwork that in an unprecedented act of innovation, Fraunhofer said, well, only a large language model could deal with that many policies, so we'll feed them into a large language model. And then we'll ask the large language model if there are any vulnerabilities, and then this is innovation, right? And we get something from the AI budget and all that, right? So the Gematik GPT was used to extract and analyze precise contextual information from a wealth of specifications. Now, at this point in time, as a security practitioner, I would say, if there is so much paperwork and so much specifications that even those who are supposed to audit them need an LLM, how do you expect anybody to understand, implement, or live by these policies, right? But okay, let's see where they got to. They did actually find a high-impact vulnerability. It was 2 even. I'm just bringing one as an example. So they said on weekends, a risk assessment of a new vulnerability that was reported from the outside can take place with a delay of 72 hours, even if it's CVSS 9 or more. And that is not okay, because if you have CVSS 9 or more, you need to spend less time until you have a risk assessment. So they said you need to have somebody working on, being on pager duty to perform a risk analysis in case there's a RCE in the health record system. So that was solved. They just added another policy, right? One more line, good. And the new policies on top of this stack of paper didn't really fit in on the slides anymore, sorry. And then eventually they released this system to the public for testing. And this is when Bianca Kastel and Martin Schiersich of CCC had a look at this. And I want to run you through a brief history of groundbreaking cyber innovation. That is, in 1961, the password was invented. Universally regarded as a big mistake, but it was invented in 1961 at MIT. In 81, crypto smart cards were invented by Siemens, now Infineon. Second factor authentication in 1984 was first go live of mass available products. And in 2025, the German health record system launches with no password, no second factor, and no use of the existing smart card. Now, this is the smart card you have here on the left, right? They had provided one of these to everybody. So we have a smart card ready. We have a crypto chip there. We can do signing. We can do all the beautiful things you can do with a smart card. And I was absolutely convinced that when I go see a doctor and I see one of these readers, which every practice, hospital, doctor has, that when I put my card in there, I was quite confident that it would make use of the cryptographic features of the card. So when Martin and Bianca told me they don't do that, I was like, nah, come on, you didn't really pay attention, right? So for a doctor to get access to your health records, they de facto need two things. That is the card number on the back of the card and your insurance number printed on the front of your card. So this is what you need to get any patient's health records. No key material, no PIN, no nothing. Now, I would call this a small violation of, how you would do this in best practice. But of course, you could say, well, you don't know of a given patient the card number or the insurance number, so what are you going to do now? Beautifully, Gematik provides an API that if you submit a card number, you get the insurance number. So now the problem is down to getting the card numbers. Beautifully, the card numbers were assigned incrementally. So some call it cyber, I call it a simple for loop. You get any card number, you can start with yours, you decrement or increment, and you get the insurance number and you can access the health records. So this was released at last year's Chaos Communication Congress on day one, 70 million digital patient records potentially accessible for hackers, right? Big news? Well, yeah, big news. Okay, yeah, big news. And of course, they said, well, we have another policy, right? We can solve this now. So they added another policy, again, not in the picture here. Now they said, well, you also need to know some substring of the address, and then we hash it all. Ta-da! Unfortunately, they had a service in their system where you give an insurance number and you get the address. So now that problem was not a problem anymore. So again, this was breached. Of course, continuing the history of groundbreaking cyber innovation, you would think, if I am able to only have two not secret strings here, or three, and I get access to these files, how is this end-to-end encrypted? Quite surprising. So end-to-end encryption invented somewhere in the 1970s. Again, 2025, the German health records, the operator holds the key, you don't. Whoever accesses the data doesn't need a key. But of course, it's end-to-end encryption. This is the innovation here. And if you confront them with that and say, like, hey, the data doesn't seem to be encrypted, they say, like, well, you know what? It's not unencrypted, it's AI ready. Well, what I'm trying to say is more paper will not do us any more good, right? We've reached the point where writing down more things will probably not create more secure systems, and we need to think of something else. So how about looking at vulnerabilities, coordinated disclosure, and stuff like that? This is something we spend a lot of time on, mainly because independent security researchers out there are, well, let's say some are unhappy or afraid that they might get into legal trouble if they, let's say, notify somebody of a vulnerability they have exploited. Sometimes I get the feeling that some are also just too lazy to go through all this bull crap. So we operate an email address where people can send us stuff, and then we'll do something. And every once in a while, my friend and colleague Matthias also takes a small excursion on the internet and finds a couple of leaks. So just one example, Identify Mobile is an SMS large-scale sender, and they were used for second factors and identification tokens, right? You sign up for WhatsApp or whatever, they send you the SMS. So Matthias found a bucket with their log files. In there, 200 million second factor messages, basically in almost real time, 200 companies using them, banks, Google, Microsoft, Telegram, whatever. And we first had to reach out to other companies that we saw were using them to find out what the exact service is, because the bucket was not named after them. So eventually we identified them, sent them a message and said, hey, can you please close this bucket? This is a bit embarrassing for the internet and second factor authentication and all that. And all we got for this is more than 100 emails from data protection officers that now wanted written confirmation from us that we had deleted and not stored any of the data we had accessed, because that allows them to close the case. Okay, thanks, bye. So now we had to, this is the thanks you get for solving these problems. I was trying to visit their website yesterday, so now their database is down. Maybe they protect themselves against data leaks better now. One thing that's good about Identify Mobile, they did not press criminal charges, as did the governing conservative party CDU when Lilith Wittmann provided them with a vulnerability in their app, as did Dtrust, which I now call Don't Trust, that we notified about a data leak while they were losing all doctors' records, right? So if you only want the doctors, not the patients, you had to go to these guys. And just recently, German, not even a security researcher, just a service provider that was solving a problem and used a hard-coded password in a binary and then notified the vendor and said, hey man, this is not how this should be done, was fined and is now a criminal for having accessed this string in the binary. So that doesn't really get us any further. Let's go to Act 3 and say, well, if we're being hacked this much, and this is, of course, the policy debate you see everywhere in the world right now, how about we hack back? If these hackers don't stop hacking us, how about we hack back? Yeah? And what I find curious here is most of these mistakes, how hackers get into a system, they are not like anything crazy cyber. It's basically somebody clicking a link. And then there's this wonderful tweet in Germany of Celi Landa. He has deleted his ex-profile for obvious reasons, which is, as an IT person, you sometimes feel like a shepherd, except the sheep are drunk and on fire and clicking on everything. And that is absolutely correct. My concern, though, is, now if you look at this or say this in an audience like this, many people laugh about it, but nobody really thinks we should do something about it. Because, I mean, it's very convenient to say that is not my problem, right? It's more convenient to have security that gets on people's nerves and gets in their way and really feels just annoying and ruins your relationship with your colleagues. So where does this get us? This is an example from my professional life, so I keep it very anonymized. So this was a fake president scam, right? Somebody sending you an email saying, please wire me money. And of course, they need a nice story here. And they said, hey, have you been contacted by PwC yet? And then the victim responded, it's not yet. And they said, okay, please reach out to them. Beautiful, because now the victim wants something. They reach out to PwC, and PwC honestly says, before I talk to you, you need to sign an NDA. And I think it's at that point that the victim became a victim, right? Because if they are asking for an NDA, that has to be legit. And I think it's this whole mystification of compliance, cyber, and everything that doesn't do anything for us, which actually makes us vulnerable. So you know how the story continues somewhat like this. And then they reached out to me and said, Linus, yeah, now we need an awareness training. We want to make sure that nobody wires a significant amount of money. And usually in these cases, you don't wire one amount. Usually the victims wire 3 amounts, because after they've done the first transfer, they receive praise, and then they are asked to do another one. So in this case, we were discussing, well, do we want to do an awareness training, or do we want to introduce 4I principle on large transfers of money, which I think might solve the problem permanently. So while an awareness training is ephemeral, needs to be done again and again, and you never get complete coverage, and you're blaming the target and the victim for it being their mistake, you could also just stand up to the problem and say, okay, let's implement a permanent, complete solution that blames the organization and improves the processes. Of course, nobody is interested in the 4I principle, right? Nobody really wants that. We can do an awareness training, we blame the target, and the CISO verdict is always on the awareness training. Now, in this world, we observe ransomware gangs, right? And they've been doing their stuff for almost a decade now. Now, ransomware gangs, I mean, who would blame them? If you're a one-trick pony and you can make money off of that one-trick exercise for 1 decade or more, and you can scale that business, and this is, by the way, from a situation where the money was paid, and they usually give you the vulnerability report. And of course, because I work in the industry, I'm always interested in how other APTs write their vulnerability reports, right? So this is theirs. It's a 6-line automated message that you get. Basically, we get somebody to click a link, and then we use Metapreter on your PCs, and then we encrypt your ESXi, right? I mean, it's always the same. And the beauty is, if you discuss with ransomware victims, they were almost as if they are relieved. They would say like, yeah, these are amateurs. They have no skills, man. And I'm usually like, yeah, but the skills were sufficient to breach you and get you in a situation where you would need to pay. Do we want to do something about it? Well, we should hack them back and inflict the same pain on them. All right, so we did that. Another case, Matthias and me, there was a victim of a ransomware attack. They found an SSH key. Because the attacker was using for C2 the SSH protocol. Now, which I think is really interesting, because that's the one protocol no admin would voluntarily get the idea to block, right? So it makes sense that an attacker would say, let's use exactly that protocol where people know that it's encrypted, there's no certificate, no MITM. And in many organizations, outgoing SSH is just not going to be blocked because the admin wouldn't, shoot their own foot. So beautiful SSH reverse shell, moving LSAS dumps, Kerberos dumps, and everything to that C2 server. And then the victim realized, well, if I use that SSH key and I put in a different username, which is not victim28, but root, I get a root shell on the C2 server. So we enjoyed that for a while. So we looked around and saw, okay, well, how does this attacker operate? What are they doing? So this is what their home directory looked like. And I like this a lot because it looks just like mine. And these are professionals on the other hand. So I thought, okay, wonderful, good. We speak the same language here. They mess around just as I do. Probably make a bit more money. So what we did was we looked at basically over the attacker's shoulder as they were uploading files and cracking hashes, and we were trying mainly from the AD dumps and password lists and whatever he was getting there to identify the victims. Not every organization names their domain after the company, so it was a bit hard to find out all of them, and we notified them. So here's the result. From 91%, we didn't even get a response. 6% said, well, thanks, guys, we got it under control. And 3% said, well, good one. Here's some more IOCs we have. How can we work together? What more can we find out about these attackers? And we did find out more, and we infiltrated a second server of theirs until we eventually presented all this. Now, I should note, we did not even receive a single burger in recognition of this whole exercise. And of course, I'm not going to name any companies that were affected and notified by us. Now, active defense is what is now discussed a lot, right? So I think it was sometime while Biden was president of the United States, when he said, if this whole cyber thing doesn't stop, we might retaliate with our weapons, because even we cannot defend against this. Now, ever since then, it's in Germany, it's in Europe, and if the discussion isn't ongoing in your country at this moment, it's going to be ongoing tomorrow again. It's like, well, we'll hack back. And what we learned from our operation is, first of all, offense doesn't compensate defense. If the hack doesn't stop you, and most organizations are not stopped by hack, why would stop the adversary, right? I mean, they have much less to lose if you infiltrate their infrastructure. This whole idea of a timely reaction is an absolute myth. Most of the organizations maybe didn't respond because they didn't have access to their email anymore. And if you think about like how would you have safe legislature that says that defines that you are hacking in defense and not in offense, right? So what they would actually need to do is infiltrate systems before they cause harm. And that, again, means before an attacker has done anything wrong. Now, that is perfectly right and okay, maybe, but you cannot write a law that allows people to the state to preemptively hack people before something happened without that law having blatant abuse potential, right? So this is why I don't trust this whole thing, and I rather illegally hack attackers, trusting they will not press criminal charges against me. Now, the other beautiful thing I've learned is ransomware gangs regularly fail at crypto implementation. So this is my colleague Tobias at the time. We were dealing with a ransomware case, and he was looking at the encrypted files, and eventually he realized and it was in VMDK images, right, like large disk images, lots of zeros in there, and he saw that they were making use of intermittent encryption, right? So they don't use all the resources, all the I/O to encrypt the whole disk image, but they just jump in there and encrypt parts of it to make it unusable. And he realized that the ciphertext always looked the same within these zeros, meaning they did start with the initialization vector every time. So all you needed was one bit of plaintext. You would be able to decrypt everything again. So we built a decryptor, and we spent our time. We first gave it to the German Federal Police, then to the FBI, to CISA, to the German BSI, to local law enforcement, and we monitored the victim block of this gang to hand people the decryptor. Nonetheless, in this year, this gang, it was Blackbuster, made about 110 million euro in ransom nonetheless. And they upgraded their crypto 3 months into this. Still, though, police, I think this is Europolice or whatever, they operate a website where they have all these decryptors ready and say, don't pay, download our decryptor here. And they say, well, maybe not every type of ransomware has a solution. Keep checking this website. I don't know if you've seen a ransomware incident. It's not like anybody said, like, oh yeah, everything is down. Our company doesn't operate anymore. Let's keep pressing F5 on nomoreransom.org to see once the decryptor is available. So that is not really solving the problem, is it? And I'm really unhappy to be on that website by now, because every once in a while you have these people that see our release of Tobias' research from 2 years ago and ask for the decryptor or complain that it doesn't work, right? And what am I going to tell them? Like, well, contrary to you, these attackers do update their vulnerabilities and patch them. So what is the problem? And that is my main concern in IT security and cyber, as many people call it. People tend to solve what is not the problem. So how it should be, you spend some on prevention, you spend some on detection, spend some on recovery. Everybody knows that it probably looks like that for them. And that means once reality kicks in, this is how it really is, right? Your prevention fails, and then you fail. And then you need to recover the whole organization from scratch. And it's an organization you usually have not really a lot of interface with. Now, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So here's people executing their plan. You have the crisis committee sitting together, and they have business, IT security, and IT. And this is the first time in years these folks are talking to each other, right? I mean, in any cafeteria, you basically can tell there are normal people, like they operate the business, they make money for the company, they are friends with each other, they have personal relationships, they are their godsons, grandma, whatever, right? They do things that nerds like us are not involved in, right? And then at the corner of the cafeteria, there is IT, right? Those are the guys nobody wants to talk with. And then if you look very closely, the IT guys, throw their food at, a small gang that doesn't even get to sit at the table. That's IT security, right? And now they are all in one room pointing at each other, and they need to rebuild an organization. And this full disconnect between the three is not only a problem for rebuilding the organization, it's usually also the problem for that caused the crisis to begin with. I've seen so many, epiphany, aha moments of IT understanding what business actually does. And I'm always curious how IT security understands their job if they don't really understand what the business does. So I think this image should look much more like this, right? IT security protects a business and not an IT. In some organizations, you get the idea that IT security really wants to protect IT from the business. That doesn't really help, right? But I find it interesting to understand, when you see what attackers do, to really understand what our mistakes are. So we have all our backup best practices, and you see them implemented everywhere. But one is missing. And the gaps in our best practices define cyber practices. And that is, nobody really has risk-based, business recovery-driven backup concepts. And that's exactly where we fail. And we will continue to fail there, decade counting now, until we understand what the business does and what these IT systems do. And I'm sorry, you'll have to talk to the users to get this information. But then you can create, hopefully, a targeted IT security concept for what that organization is actually doing. Now, this has another very inconvenient consequence. We need to stop blaming users for the broken IT environments we built for them, right? If their daily work puts our infrastructure or the business at risk, we need to change, right? We need to build environments that they cannot put at risk or break as part of their normal job. If I'm telling people, here's your annual awareness training, please do not open file attachments, or please do not click on links in emails. I should provide a work environment that makes that possible for people. We usually don't do that. Now, this all leads us to a world in which the average CISO is more afraid of regulators than of attackers. And it makes absolute sense, because if you have a crisis and you manage the crisis and you get the damage, that's good, you're not going to lose your job. If you do not pass the audit, that's when you're going to lose your job. So I think the incentives in this industry are completely off, and that is why attackers benefit from them. So everybody benefits from mystifying cyber instead of owning up to the problems, right? Government and regulator, they write another act, DORA, CISA, CRA, IT security law 1 and 2 in Germany. I was an expert witness on both. I told them this is not going to do anybody good, and I don't think it did. But they have done something, right? And that is important. They have done something. And the CISO, the CEO, and the board of an organization, they keep their job. Good, because they've done something, right? They passed the audit. And the vendors keep selling snake oil, so they are happy. And the attackers are happy because they don't even need to improve, right? They can continue to be one-trick ponies for a decade or longer. Now, only a few days ago, I had the privilege to speak with a couple of IT security professionals from Ukraine. And I would say those people, I would think they have a lot of evolutionary pressure at this point in time. So I asked them, look, can you tell me what you did, what was money not well spent, money that expenditures or efforts that you dropped once, Ukraine was under such attack pressure? And they said, well, here's what we learned. First of all, we do not annual, but monthly or even weekly live fire drills and recovery exercises to make sure that what other people call a crisis is just a routine for us. Because frankly, in Ukraine right now, everyday life is a crisis and it is routine. So by the time they are hit, they've done this 10 times before. They do acknowledge a capability gap because there's so many people actually fighting the war, and they realized if you do not act like cyber is something mythical, and you let people learn something, they do learn it, and you do get the effects. And this is something that particularly Ukrainian women benefit from because they are not sent to war. So they are now entering the cyber industry, and they're doing really good. And I asked them, well, what about all this compliance stuff? And they said, well, it wasn't there to begin with, so we didn't have to cut it down. Now, if the country that is under the most attack pressure right now does not rely on compliance and does a pretty good job maintaining operations, maybe it's time for us to learn from this. We need to understand what we protect. It's not an IT. And we need to understand what we protect against, and then we can create targeted security concepts at the expense of being responsible for making the world a better place. Thanks a lot. That's my take on IT security.